First tonight, President Trump has threatened to strip America's oldest university, Harvard, of its tax-exempt status as a row grows over the government's attempt to impose conditions on campuses. The White House has already frozen grants to Harvard, accusing it and other Ivy League universities of left-wing activism and anti-Semitism. Harvard says the government is violating the U.S. Constitution. In an open letter to staff and students, Harvard's president, Alan Garber, said the university couldn't allow itself to be taken over by the federal government. In response, President Trump has suggested that Harvard should be stripped of its tax-exempt status if it continues to push what he calls political, ideological, and terrorist-inspired sickness. Correspondents say the standoff could test not only the limits of government power, but the independence that has made American universities a destination for scholars from around the world.
Harvard has become the first university to openly defy the Trump administration as it demands sweeping changes at colleges accused of tolerating campus anti-Semitism. In response, the federal government said it's freezing more than $2 billion in grants and contracts to the Ivy League school. It sets the stage for a battle that could test the government's power and test the independence that has made U.S. universities a destination for scholars around the world. The government hasn't said exactly which grants and contracts are being frozen, but is likely to target Harvard's massive research operation. Harvard says that's money that has supported groundbreaking innovations and helped find treatments for diseases ranging from Alzheimer's to diabetes. It's unclear how this will all play out, but it could end up in a legal battle if Harvard sues to protect its funding.
Well, for more on this, I'm joined now on the line from Chicago by the Republican strategist and chair of Republicans Overseas UK, Greg Swenson. Great to see you, Greg. I mean, you're in a slightly different part of the world from where you normally are, but that's fine. That actually fits right in. So Donald Trump escalating the war against America's top universities with a threat to strip Harvard of its status that exempts it from tax because it refuses to submit to wide-ranging government oversight. The government has already frozen over $2 billion in federal grants destined for Harvard. What's the justification for that?
Oh, I think the justification is pretty clear. I mean, what Harvard has become is a bastion of anti-Semitism, and they've really encouraged the sort of that pro-Hamas wing of the protesters to basically shut down their campus. And at the same time, they've been very hostile to free speech from other people. So if it's from pro-Hamas people, it's okay, or anti-Semitic people, it's okay to have free speech. But if you have diversity of opinions, if you have perhaps conservative thought, then it's not permissible. So they're in a real bind here, and I think they've chosen a really odd hill to die on when most Americans don't really support the organizations that Harvard is so desperately defending. And the other thing to keep in mind too, Charles, is this isn't a war against Harvard. It's a war against anti-Semitism and hostility, a war against hostility to free speech, or a war against censorship. So look, this is long overdue. I was quite pleased to see that Columbia University agreed to the terms with the president. And remember, this is not going to use taxpayer dollars, then you cannot allow anti-Semitism on your campus.
We lost you for a small bit there, but we got the gist of what you were saying. But of course, Greg, Harvard says the US government wants to micromanage the institution and to impose its own demands on hiring, admissions of students and selection of the faculty. I mean, and it said no, basically, based on its values and its institutional integrity. I mean, surely you can see why Harvard had taken this position, can't you?
I can see why they want to make an argument for institutional independence. That's fine, except that they're taking taxpayer dollars, first of all. But again, this is not one philosophy versus another. This is simply saying that the Constitution protects people's civil rights. If this was an African American that was being harassed on campus instead of a Jewish American, I think the whole country would be up in arms. So what we're saying is that the protections that are afforded government employees and other people that are protected by the civil rights amendments in the Constitution have to be also protected at Harvard, especially if they're taking taxpayer money. If they really wanted to continue with the admissions based on the color of your skin instead of on the content of your character, they should stop taking federal money. That's all they have to do. Say, look, get out of our business. That's fine. We're gonna choose our candidates based on sexual orientation or the color of their skin. We're gonna discriminate against Jewish people in the admissions process and in terms of safety on campus. We're going to do that, but I'm not paying for it, right? I just don't want American taxpayers to pay for that kind of behavior. And that's all the president is saying is, we're not going to continue to pay for this. And if you really want to continue doing that, then don't take the money. Don't take taxpayer money.
Well, to be quite fair, Greg, I mean, that's not entirely the way that it is. I mean, many lawyers, including conservative lawyers, say that this is not the case. I mean, they say, and I'm quoting some of them now, they say the US government is not within its rights to condition federal funding in this way. They say that the US government asking the university to ask its staff, faculty and student body whether they are moderate, independent, Republican or Democrat, that is a violation of the First Amendment because they don't hire students or hire people or admit students on the basis of political ideology. I mean, surely you can see that there isn't and shouldn't be a political litmus test at Harvard.
Right. Yeah, Charles, I have not heard that. So if that's the case, I would agree that would be a mistake to have any kind of a political litmus test. The problem is they've been doing that in faculty hiring for the last 10 years. They insist that any applicant for graduate school or for faculty positions writes a diversity letter of some sort where they basically have to suggest that they're progressive. And that's made almost 100% of new faculty at these top universities progressive and radically left. And so if there's any way to fix that, which I would rather just say no more diversity letters. You can't require a candidate to express his progressive views because it was real pressure on any candidate to basically lean left in that letter in order to get a faculty position. So I'd rather just eliminate all the bias. Bias is really bad. And what happened with Harvard specifically, Charles, is they were discriminating against Jewish and especially Asian Americans. And the Asian American community filed a suit against Harvard and they won because Harvard was specifically discriminating against people based on the color of their skin, which Americans find really disgusting. So I think if there's a moment to change that and force Harvard to follow the civil rights laws of the United States, I think that's completely valid.
Well, I mean, I'm not doubting you, but I haven't seen the evidence you're talking about. I mean, the reason Harvard...
It's there.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. We do trust you, Greg. But I mean, the reason Harvard is regarded as one of the world's best universities is because it represents a range of perspectives in the classroom and a wide range of ideas in its research. It's a place where a diversity of ideas flourish and are supposed to flourish. Why would anyone want to change that by accusing it of being too liberal?
I think it's the other way around, Charles. It used to be a place of diversity of ideas. And then over the last perhaps decade or two, it's become a place of groupthink. Now, I'm not talking about science and STEM subjects, but even in those subjects, the faculties that they recruit are overwhelmingly leftist because they require them to write these essays. But the rest of the university, there is no diversity of thought. So look, I'm not sure how you police that. I'm not sure it's government's role to police and enforce diversity of thought. 50 years ago, universities were roughly 50% left, 50% right. Now it's 95-5, and I think I'm being kind. So I'm not sure that government should take a role in forcing that diversity. But what I can tell you is Harvard is not a place of diversity of ideas anymore. It's become completely groupthink. And by the way, some of that groupthink is anti-Semitic and anti-Asian. So, that's a little bit of a challenge too. But these are good debates to have, because I'm not sure that government should have a role in a private institution. But Harvard is not a private institution, because it takes billions of dollars from the United States government. They're jeopardizing 60 billion in potential grants and aid, because they want to argue about the fact that the government wants them to stop the anti-Semitic culture on the campus. So it's a tough, it's a fine line. I'm not sure how to define that, but I can tell you for sure there is very little diversity of thought at Harvard.
I mean, I think you've made a number of points there, Greg, and one of them, which I would agree with, is that there should be no place for any kind of discrimination. And Harvard is arguing that they don't discriminate against anybody. And perhaps the point that you make about years ago it used to be 50-50 conservative. I mean, maybe America is just leaning more towards the left. I mean, the population is changing and all the rest of it.
It's a good point, but it's a 50-50 country. I mean, we've seen that in the last several elections. It's basically 50%. It's a center-right country. It's slightly more conservative, but not much. But when you see the universities at 95-5, 95% progressive or liberal and 5% conservative, that's where you start to worry that they've maybe tilted a little too much to the left. A little bias is fine, but discriminating against Asian people, discriminating against Jewish people in the admissions process shouldn't be tolerated. So I think it's a long time coming.
Again, that's, I don't really want to argue about that. But I mean, if you look at all the Nobel Prize winners and so on that Harvard has produced, most of them are Jewish. So, I mean, that's
I know, it's amazing,
Charles.
Like it's more shocking when that's the case. I mean, Larry Summers was the president of Harvard 10 years ago, the great economist and former Treasury Secretary. This is an institution that's, I mean, all these old universities have a little bit, of a checkered past if you go back 300 or 400 years. But, Harvard in this century, the last century, has been just, quite often the top university in the world. And it's a shame to see what's happened to Harvard in the last 20 years. I hope they come back. I hope they fix what's wrong. They bring diversity of thought back, and they bring admissions based on qualifications and merit. And that's, I think, what we're all about right now is let's go back to a merit-based society. And again, judging people by either their skills or their brains or the content of their character, not the color of their skin.
Well, I mean, their argument, Greg, is that there is nothing wrong at all, that Donald Trump has come storming in and is coming up with all kinds of things with his conservative sort of right supporters. I mean, this federal funding, for instance, was committed to Harvard because Harvard had applied for it, was qualified for it, and was entitled to it. But based upon President Trump's personal political partisan prerogative, he froze it. I mean, is the government within its right to withhold that money if it wants to? Because a lot of lawyers say it isn't, and that's why they've gone to court.
I mean, no one's entitled to money from the U.S. taxpayer. So that's, I think, what President Trump's view. But more importantly, I mean, I was here a year ago, Charles, in the U.S. when these campuses were really in an uprising situation. They were not allowing Jewish students to go to class. They were the pro-Hamas protesters were threatening Jewish students on campus. It was a complete riot. There was vandalism. At Columbia, they took over the university and occupied a building. So this was really upside down. This is not President Trump with some personal bias. The American people were appalled at what they saw a year ago. And so look, if Harvard wants to continue being anti-Semitic, there is some danger to that. But I especially wish they would do it with their own money. They have a $50 billion endowment. And if they want to make sure that there's no diversity of thought and it's groupthink, then go ahead, but not with taxpayer dollars and not with the tax breaks of being exempt from property and income tax. So, it's sad to see anti-Semitism on campus, but I think that's what happens when you have groupthink. So, I mean, I would hope they would do it on their own, but if they really want to continue with the way that they're leaning the last, 10 or 20 years, go ahead and do that, but use your endowment. They have plenty of money. Just don't take taxpayer dollars if you're going to have this kind of a culture on your campus.
Well, I mean, Greg, not to be going sort of back and forth. I mean, the point really here is that campuses, many universities, and I went to university in America. I mean, many universities nobody supports anti-Semitism or discrimination against Asian American students or whatever. But I mean, the universities tend to be hotbeds of emotive places. You see what I mean? In the 1960s, during the civil rights movements and so on, the universities were the hotbed of protest against the mistreatment of black Americans. I mean, and at the time, the thinking was that, the universities are turning radical because they were fighting on behalf of black students who were being discriminated against. The same thing now happened with not so much Hamas, but the treatment of Palestinians. I think if you get the two mixed up, then it looks like they're supporting. They weren't really supporting Hamas. I don't accept the treatment, the way that they treated a lot of the Jewish students, but certainly they were supporting the people they felt were the underdogs, who were the Palestinians. Anyway, just to move on from there, President Trump has now threatened Harvard's tax-exempt status. Why should he question the university's charitable and educational status? I mean, clearly that is not in doubt, is it, for an institution that renders so much service to the world and that gives so much more than it receives?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure about the last part, but look, President Trump I don't think he's ever had a problem with Harvard, right? He went to an Ivy League school himself. The problem is right now, or in the last 10 or 15 years, they have been discriminating against Asian American students, and I'm quite sure other students, but specifically Asian Americans. And I know that only because they filed the suit and were successful in the suit. And it was proven that they were, in fact, discriminating against Asian Americans. Now, whether they have followed the rules since then, whether they have changed their pattern, that's debatable, because there's other ways that are less obvious to discriminate. But I think that it's also a function of these universities have made it impossible for Jewish students to attend. In many ways, they've made it impossible for Asian students to attend because they just don't admit them into the university. But the Jewish students that have been able to get into those colleges, to be accepted or admitted to those universities, are finding it very difficult. And so, these, again, if that's the way they want to operate, it's not as much to do with liberal, conservative. You're right, Charles. You're absolutely right. The universities have been hotbeds of progressive and liberal, kind of the anti-war protests, the civil rights protests. Of course, I went to university too. I probably was a liberal at that time because it was more fashionable when you're a university student. But I do think that's what's changed is the lack of group, or the consistent group think in the faculty. So 50 years ago, the students were liberal. And that's just part of the nature of universities. So you're absolutely right on that. But the problem now is the faculty is completely one-dimensional. And I'm not saying government should have a role in that. I'm not suggesting, President Trump should stop that. Just don't discriminate against someone who's conservative. And that's what those DEI statements were doing for faculty recruiting. So, there's a lot of challenges for universities right now. If they want to behave a certain way, that's fine. but they shouldn't take taxpayer money then. And by the way, Charles, taxpayer funding raises the bar in terms of your your commitment to civil rights and civil rights obligations. It does raise the bar. So if you accept federal funding, you have to check more boxes. And Harvard, if they really don't want to check those boxes, they shouldn't take the money.
Well, I mean, as we said, the White House says it's freezing just over $2 billion of federal funding for Harvard. I mean, as we assess how serious a financial situation that's going to put Harvard in, I mean, potentially whether the university could even go bust. I mean, the other way of looking at it, Greg, is that given the scale of the threat to Harvard for that amount of money being frozen, I mean, Harvard is willing to risk its financial existence in order to ensure its integrity. I mean, that is impressive.
Yeah. Well, no. Well, I mean, if they want to do that, good for them. But I think it's a big mistake. Other universities of higher learning have realized the merits of having diversity of thought and have tried to change their ways, notably Columbia. But I think that what the president here is saying is, you have a $52 billion endowment. You should be spending your own money if you want to continue with this, this groupthink and discrimination. That's fine, but not with taxpayer dollars. And I would say Harvard, more than any other university, will have no risk of going out of business. They are really, really wealthy in terms of their endowment. But I do think if there were smaller universities that don't have that kind of endowment that got into this kind of trouble with the president, that would be difficult. And by the way, it's the same on the other side. There are some conservative universities left in America, very few. But one I'm thinking of, which is Hillsdale in Michigan, they don't take any taxpayer funding because they don't want to be told that they have to, sign on to some ideology they don't believe in. And so, I think that's where we might end up going, where universities have to take a responsibility that if they take government money, they have to perhaps, conform with government or get government regulations that they don't want to really deal with. And so I can understand it from both sides, both from the right and the left.
Well, we'll see what the courts think. Greg, thank you ever so much.
Thanks,
it's
Charles.
always brilliant talking with you. Greg Swenson is a Republican strategist, chair of Republicans Overseas UK. He was talking to me on the line there from Chicago.